Hey everybody, this is Hector and welcome to the Faith and Fandom Podcast, Artists Alley Aftermath for Camp Grace Jamboree 2025. This is going to be a little bit different because this is not a Comic-Con, and this was also my first time doing this event, and full disclosure, I have a metric ton of ties to this organization and ministry, so it won't be unbiased in my perspective, just a heads up. But just to tell you experience, because every journey's an adventure, right? So, Camp Grace is a Bible camp, summer camp / does ministries year round in Fairmont, North Carolina. It's about 20 minutes south of me currently. You can almost see the camp from the sombrero of south of the border. It is a place that I really started my adult ministry at, period. I volunteered there when I was 16, or what would be there when I was 16. I was a full-time staff person / missionary by the time I was 19, and I worked and lived there let's say I lived there from 2002 until 2010. But I was the director of teen ministries, and I did discipleship with kids, and I taught classes in schools and ran music festivals and all the things. So I've had a lot. I've also been on the board there for the last probably 8 years, and my kids go there and work there, and also a speaker. So again, heavily invested, not biased, not unbiased in the slightest. But the Jamboree, for my memory at least, has been like an evening thing of where it's, hey, you guys can come on out to the camp and do bonfires and s'mores, and there'll be some music artists and stuff like that. This go round, they made it into like a fall festival and vendor thing. And I said, you know what? I've been on the road a lot, and it wouldn't hurt me to do something local and support my local ministry and do all these things. So I said, you know what? Let's do the Camp Grace Jamboree. Fully knowing that the type of folks that are going to be there aren't necessarily my target audience for ministry or outreach or content, but you do what you do. It was also not crazy expensive for vendors. It was like $25, so not the worst investment. And they give you a table and chairs. Come on, $25 isn't a bad deal. So I went out to camp. And sorry, it's been a day. I went out to camp, and the gate was going to open at 9, so that you could set up at 9 between 9 and 10:30 when the event started. And I pulled up. There were people kind of waiting back far, and I know they were new people who hadn't really spent a ton of time at the property, so I just kind of drove past them. And then I got to the gate, and low-key, I know how to drive around the gate, so I drove around the gate and went to my table and greeted everybody and kind of got started loading in. There were a handful of vendors and artists. In my mind, let's say 15 vendors and artists on one side of the property. Across the field, which is about an NFL football field, probably in my mind, there was a food truck that was doing coffee, ice creams, and pastries. And there was also someone doing like quesadillas and grilling food in their little outdoor pavilion area. So that was kind of like the setup. 15 vendors and artists, and then food on the other side, and their activities like basketball and rock climbing walls and mini golf and stuff like that going on around it. And then in the dining hall, which was the building behind me, they were having a chili cook-off, and an all day long musical concert series of different churches, artists, ministries, and performers coming to perform. So they were going to start at 10:30, and so we got out and started setting up. I saw one of the vendors was a 3D printer dude from my church. Then there were people who did art block prints, and then there were people who sold knives, and there were crocheters and crafty people. There was a lady that was doing desserts. There's more crafty people. There was clothing people, just a lot of different stuff. And it was very much a craft and vendor sale. And there was a pretty good variety of this type thing. And obviously, I was not the only nerdy stuff, because I saw some people with Mario things, and stuff like that. So it was pretty diverse. I took my time setting up and just chit-chatted with everybody. I was trying to avoid having board member conversations while I was out there doing that, but sometimes that stuff can't be avoided. So as I was getting set up, chit-chatted, did the things, and people were kind of setting up all over, and there are people that were setting up their booths for the first time, and things of that nature. So it was just an experience in people watching. And let's see. One of the first little moments of things being interesting was one of my college coworkers, who is like a dean over certain industrial things, came up by me, and I was like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And he was with a church group that was going to sing. I was like, "Cool." And as they were setting up for the singing thing, they opened all the windows in the building behind us so that people could hear, and started really getting ready for it. And they brought a whole church choir worship team out. And I think by the time things were getting set up at 10:30, I talked to the lady of Over Yonder Coffee, Teas, and Creamery. It's not necessarily a plug, but sort of a plug. They are my favorite coffee shop in Bladenboro, North Carolina, but I also think they're the only coffee shop in Bladenboro, North Carolina. So take that as it is. But they make really good stuff, and I've worked with them on a lot of events. And so she came over and she was looking at stuff. She asked me what I want. She literally walked the whole football field to go make me a drink and then bring it back to me, which was wonderful. And I mean this fully. If that coffee truck had been closer, I would have drunk so much more. But because it was a whole football field and I didn't want to leave my booth that long, I didn't go get more. But it would have been dangerous because it's good stuff. They started doing the gospel singing, and it was good. It was, older Southern people doing potentially contemporary songs. So it's got a bit of old, a bit of new to it. And I'll say this, and this is no shade or criticism intended. It was not as heavily attended as one would have hoped. There were definitely people that came out, but because camp is 20 miles from civilization, and it was, craft vendors and musicians and stuff like that, not everybody came. A good bit of the teen volunteers and stuff did come, and they were present, and there was always somebody watching the different music groups. But it was not as jam-packed as I think anybody would have hoped if they were putting the event on, which is, again, starting new things, changing things how it goes. There's always going to be a bit of a shift. The first gospel group was from a church in Pembroke, North Carolina called Calvary Way. And they did a good job. And I'll say they probably brought the most people with them to the event. I walked in there to go to the bathroom at one point, and then one of the folks from stage started waving at me, and I realized another one of my college coworkers was also in that worship team. And went on back out to my booth, And once they started shifting and that group left and another group was getting ready, the dude I saw at the beginning came and said, I didn't know you were a person of faith. And here's the thing. 99% of the people that know me from ministry of some capacity. Whether it be camp or college or youth or pastoring or faith and fandom. They know me from some ministry. So I forget that sometimes that when I do my muggle job at the college now, which I've only had for like a year and 3/4, that I've not always been put in ministry labels or capacities in that in office. I was like, yeah, I'm a Christian. I, built the place you're standing at and been doing ministry 93% of my life. Not really. It's more like 56% of my life, maybe more. Either way. And he's like, and then he said the most like southern gentlemanly way of saying this. He's like, well, we'll have to find each other at work and talk about our faith. And I was like, okie dokie. And about that time, someone came out and I realized it was one of my lifelong mentors. A woman who, without her presence in my life, I would not be me. In 7th grade, there was my teacher in 7th grade was a lady named Miss Revels, Dina Revels. And she was a great teacher. She was strong. She was fierce. She was funny. She was spiritual. She was the kind of person that would pray for you, but then literally had no qualms taking a 6'4" kid and bending them over a desk and beating them with a paddle. Like no beef whatsoever. And Miss Revels was just great. She really was. And she was a fantastic teacher, and I benefited greatly from her being my 7th grade teacher. That was a big year for me. That was like the year I came to Christ, I believe. Yeah, 7th grade, that would track. So I was in her class when I got saved. And so she like started pouring like discipleship stuff into me as a middle school student. Well, we loved her so much that when 7th grade ended, we like all made a petition with our 7th grade classmates to the principal to move her up with us. And it worked. So I had Miss Revels all of my 7th grade and all of my 8th grade. So she was there with me like when my parents were divorcing and when I was experiencing life on different levels, growing in my faith, all these things. She was a rock. As I would grow older, her church would support me as a missionary. She became a principal of a school later on down the road. So when I was teaching Bible classes at schools, she was there. She supported my family in various ways. And she's always been like this rock and spiritual guidance for me, my whole life. And when I was a missionary, she was one of the first people to like sign on the line to say, yo, I'm batting for you. And in fact, I don't know if she's still a part of that church that she was at then, but the fellowship hall, or no, it was fellowship hall. It's the RAs, like Royal Ambassadors, is like a men's youth Bible study group. The Royal Ambassador room is named after me at her old church. If it is still her church, I don't know. But it was just kind of a whole thing of like, she's been in my life. And so she came over and like, she was there to watch her daughter sing in that worship team. And, we got hugs and we talked and she asked me how the kids were and all these things. And then I was like, oh, wait, did you ever get my Mary and Martha book? And so I gave her that. And then my college coworker's like, I need that. And so he picked up that and one of my kids' books. And so that was my first sale of the day, was my coworker buying 2 of the books. But I got to see one of my lifelong mentors, and that was, that was a price of admission moment. That was worth setting up and going out there the whole day. Now, this was another weird season of time where it's between the weather being 50 degrees and 70 to 80 degrees, and it's North Carolina, and where my booth was just directly facing the sun most of the day, so I got sunburned. And so I initially had a bandana on with my hair back, but then I put on a like newsy cap because my face was getting burned and I was trying to slow that process down. Um, as I went on throughout the day, I realized pretty quickly, based on people asking for things, that I was out of Vader shirts, my Darth Vader shirts. I'm out of uh, extra large, 2 extra large, and 3 extra large. I'm just cleaned out. And before con season officially kicks back in, I am going to have to work on that and get my shirts together because I ain't going to go very far without it. As the day was going on and people would start coming out more so around lunchtime and as the different worship groups are going up and everything. And eventually one of the families that came out was another family from my church. But it's a unique story with their family and the place we were at. They have 2 daughters right now, Harper and Charlie. And Tyler and Caitlin are the couple. And the thing is, Tyler's kids were running around camp all day. But rewind 20 years ago, and I used to watch Tyler run around camp at that age in that same spot before he would be in like my teen discipleship ministry. This was the kid who I had to constantly ask him to remove the set of testicles that hung from the trunk of his vehicle, like the rubber ones that would hang from people's like hitch. And I was like, hey bud, can you not bring those into ministry events? Thanks. Like, this is that guy. And then fast forward all these years later, he's there with his kids. He's active in my church. He's growing in the Lord. He's in men's groups. He's doing all sorts of things. And now his kids are delightful little humans, and I get to see them and interact with them too and be part of their spiritual development. So it's neat literally being there present for generations. So his kids come up to the booth and they're flipping through and they get to the K-pop Demon Hunters thing, and there are 2 girls and their family, and they get to the roomie from K-pop Demon Hunters, and they are literally about to have a knife fight over who gets roomie from K-pop Demon Hunters. And I was like, you know what? Hold up, back up, slow down. Y'all aren't going anywhere. I'll draw you another roomie. So it's like I started redrawing roomie. And it took my time. And then like the kid who's getting the roomie literally came behind the booth just to watch me draw it. So it was more interaction with them. So as they're running around playing, I'm talking to their dad about businesses and life and family. And it was just it was the same reason why I do sketches and stuff at cons. It affords time to talk to people. One of the many reasons. As I got the pencils done, the kid came back and they're like, hey, I want to color the background. And I'm like, oh, that sounds like a lovely idea. So I did a quick outline in the background color, which was pink. And I was like, all right, you just color outside of this line, okay? Which is a terrible life choice, but, you know, it's $1 sketch this kid's doing. I'm not really worried about it. And she does pretty good, but she does get some pink in the eye. And I was like, hey, sir, as you pay for this sketch, I do need you to know that pink in that eye was not for me. But it was a good opportunity, good time talking to them and everything that went along with that. And I got to talk to some other families from our church about some different stuff going on. And we just recently had a member from our congregation die. So we had some conversations about that and just good stuff overall. My kids brought me a quesadilla and another coffee drink from that food truck, which was great. And again, more worship groups were coming throughout the night. And there was one group that is very popular in our area, especially with teens. And they had a good amount of kids that came to show. But, you know, you could tell also that some of the folks performing were a little frustrated that there weren't more people there for them, especially as we got on towards the evening and things kind of dissipating. You could see some of the frustration setting in, but it was a good time. There's a lady that wanted to buy a Vader shirt, and I absolutely didn't have one, which sucked. but it's okay. And there are friends of mine who have known me for like a decade or so, but have never seen my booth because they've never been to a Comic-Con. So for some of them, it was their first time getting to really see the booth as well. Then one of my friends and associates, and the dude who used to make my t-shirts for Faith and Fandom, came by and said, "Hey, you know what? I'm building a library in my house, and I don't have any of your books. So I want to buy one of everything." I was like, "What?" And so he straight up bought one of every book that I had on me at the show, which is the majority of them. Definitely didn't have one or two, and maybe that's what she said. But like, it was kind of crazy that he was that serious about it that quickly. And he walked away with 2 giant GalaxyCon bags full of books, and I was just like, "Oh, okay." Like, this was not the most attended event or the most purchased event, but like, it still turned out to be a solid investment just because of people being supportive as they were. As the evening started wrapping up, some nerd friends of mine that were there tried to do a Grim Snarl Max raid in Pokemon Go. They got 10 of us gathered around my booth to try and take this thing down. And when I tell you I've never been defeated so hard in my life by a Pokemon, this thing manhandled us. 10 people did not make a dent. Like, you wouldn't have known we existed. This Goliath thing was just like laying waste to us. So we tried it once, and then we started laughing about 5 minutes into it. Also, there was another camp missionary who was there at their own booth, and they kept saying, "Y'all need to be jealous of me. I'm catching mighty Pokemon." And it was super cute. The day went on, packed up, wrapped up, and I'll also say the camp was really good about making sure that volunteers were coming by to check and see if we had water. I did that. They brought me water several times. I bought a little cake from one of the ladies like down the row. There was a printmaker from UNCP, and I absolutely would have bought a shirt that he made that looked like the Shire and had a Biden Christ, but didn't have it my size, and I don't have space for paper printing right now. But that being said, it was a good event. It was a chill event. I got to just sit there and talk to people and be encouraged and encourage others, and also played a lot of Legend of Zelda while I was sitting there. So that was also a nice experience. That's it. Now, my last currently booked show for the year is upcoming in just a couple days for me, is going to be at Rogue Comic-Con in Reidsville, North Carolina at New Lebanon Church. And it's coming up this weekend, the 22nd of November. There may be some other things I end up doing before the year. I'm also bouncing around between surgical times and trying to see when that's happening, if it does. So before I go, I want to take a moment to thank our Patreon supporters: Jess Luttrell from Cosplay for Christ, Jackie Kraft, Kelly Townsend, Alan Wallace, Fab Quack, Rivka and Tristan Birch, Dorothy Martin Winston, Michelle Stewart, Miss Lynn Turner, David Brooks, Jeff Weimer, Colin Sproles, Jamie Montgomery, the Matthew Coleman, and the Coleman family, and Jonathan Herman, Ron Petit, Gear Saber Cosplay, Scott Ward, Alicia Glenn, Jay Sheed, Jason Crutchfield, Mike Perna, Todd Turner, John Jacobs, Zach Harris, Caleb Grimm. Caleb Grimm is also one of the folks that I met doing that camp ministry. I think maybe I met him doing his youth group leading worship. I don't know. One of those things. Jeanette Skaggs, Jason Bullock, Christina Ray, Sarah Lewis, Patrick Gale, Rebecca Godlove, and Adam Davis. Thank you all for your encouragement and support and being part of all that Faith and Fandom does. And I hope to see you all at a con real soon.